we have a modest proposal. Let's heal America's wounds, but let's see how, if anybody takes it seriously, and what the person wants. Um, the unresolved cruelties of America's past are a common topic in politics, and many believe that Native Americans and African Americans deserve compensation for the injustice that was suffered by our ancestors. And while in no way denying the merits of these prior claims, we might also consider those things about to happen, the things that we know that are lying ahead of us. Aside from reparations for things in the past, we should also consider reparations for things in the near future and compensate in advance for an injustice which has not yet happened, but certainly will happen down the line. Now, this impending gross injustice is an inexorable demographic shift that will, within decades, make white people a minority in America. And yes, the people who discovered America, explored the vast continent, and built this nation from nothing, or so they like to insist, and they will at some point be less than half our population. From the birth of this nation, white Americans have been able to dominate the country by a combination of grotesque political structure, our Byzantine election laws, and their aggressive, often unapologetic suppression of other groups. Now, the white dominance is slipping away by the force of immigration and disproportionate birth rates, and the day looms when their tenure of dominance will end. And when that day comes, we can imagine them crying out, as they always do when things don't go their way, that it's just not fucking fair. Now, if they did no more than mule and whine about it, and adding to the general din and clamor on the right, we might ignore it as background noise. But these people are dangerous and will act out their frustrated fantasies, as we learned on January 6th of last year. And so, in despite of reparations for the injustice of this pending historical shift, in the hope of preventing more outbreaks of violence for which the white population is fully armed and prepared, we should consider payment to white Americans before demographics do their damage, and yes, pay them beforehand, soften the blow in advance, and conciliate their goodwill while we still have the chance. Now, many people say that this is a ridiculous fucking proposal, and I prefer to describe it as modest. But for one, there are many white Americans who accept their declining demographic with equanimity, and they have no need of reparations for injustice that they do not perceive. Now, clearly, my proposal is not intended for least tolerant citizens. Among warm and full disclosure, but there is a significant proportion of the white population that sees the matter in a different light, and in any society with the claim to being a democracy. Now, everyone must be heard, and their views considered. The only views I consider are mine, and I don't give a shit about the Republican views. So all the more so, if the disaffected citizens are strongly disposed to violence. In the last election, 74 million Americans voted to continue a racist, corrupt, and incompetent administration, and the most vehement among these voters, supposedly convinced that they had been cheated out of their election victory, which they weren't, and they acted out their frustration in a violent Klan insurrection at the nation's capital. Now, these people, too, are Americans indeed, but they insist that they're only real Americans, which they're not. The living embodiments of American values, which was the exact opposite. So we must appeal to them in a way that they will understand. Sorry, but I don't speak in a third grade language. So we must make them an offer that they can't refuse, or at least one that they're highly unlikely to, while calling out on what they prize most, the highest of American values, fucking money. Now, fortunately, the white rate in America has displayed such boundless, avarice and self-regard that we may safely assume that its alleged fervor for electoral justice will diminish with the prospect of financial reward. Now, after all, the white right sells its votes in every election, and they have done that for decades. Now, its members take money in exchange for their ballots when they vote for the party that promises them the largest tax cut that they never receive. So basically, now to be sure of this, that money is clearly disguised in the garb of reduced taxes, but it's a sale nonetheless. Instead, we might point out We might point out to these citizens that selling their votes for a tax cut amount to being paid with their own money. Just imagine how much more appealing it would be to sell their vote for other people's money. A new federal agency might be required to administer this, but it's highly unlikely that the white rates version to a big government would extend to any entity that serves its own financial interest. How will applicants prove that they are qualified? And all they really need is a copy of their birth certificate, and a short form will do, and also a supporting document to establish whiteness. For example, memberships in any established organization of the far Republican side, like the Proud Boys, Three Percenters, Oath Keepers, Boogaloo Boys, the KKK, or if we must, the spineless sycophantic rump remnant of the white right known as the Republican Party. Once the qualified pool is identified, and how are we to determine the amount to pay? Now, for reasons explained above, I suggest about 5,000, paid every 2 years, considering coinciding with federal elections, and for a period of 20 years. And this would spread out the financial burden over an extended period of time, recognizing the political views of the white right. The program would have to be funded with no new taxes. One method that comes to mind would be ending our current subsidies for the Afghan drug lords, and using this money to address the injustice in our own country. And who would object to something so sensible? How will the money actually be paid? One method seems especially appealing. It's widely understood that many people on the white right, if not most, carry some degree of financial burden, often in the form of crushing credit card debt. I suggest that the biennial of 5,000 should be paid directly toward the qualified white applicant's credit card debt. That directly is MBNA, Citibank, Capital One, and so forth. Such lenders would certainly embrace this bold form, which in turn would relieve them from the burden of chasing down deadbeats from one rural forwarding address to another. And while members of the white right would be liberated to charge even more to their credit cards, and American retailers, especially those who sell liquor, guns, pharmaceuticals, and electronics, and they would have a fresh infusion of cash, and it's a win-win-win situation. Now, on the farthest fringes of the white right, there may well be indeed some solvent citizens who will condemn this program as socialism. But really, is there anyone within that demographic who has ever rejected a Social Security check, Medicare benefit, or military pension, or so-called socialism in any other form? Certainly not. But of course they will insist that their fucking benefits have been fairly earned, are paid for with their salary deductions over a lifetime, and that socialism means any benefit that isn't earned or paid for, like welfare, which we know that's what the Republicans love to get is welfare. And we all know that money paid to white people by definition cannot be welfare. And they after all have always insisted that government must never give anyone a free ride. Well, let's look at this, okay? Let's take them at their word for this. And now, if we are to provide them with reparations for an injustice that has not yet happened, and which some might describe as no injustice at all, this dreaded demographic shift, which they call replacement, neglecting to mention the millions of people who are already here, but they're replaced by Europeans, and if they insist on the principle of no free lunch, then they should be willing to meet one simple condition. In exchange for these payments of $5,000 every 2 years, they must agree not to vote in any federal election for the next 20 years. That's it. Take the money, but give up your vote. And who could possibly object to this? In the past, this cherished American demographic has sold their votes for tax cuts and symbolic culture, the war policies, and then they had to bother to vote in order to get what they fucking wanted. Now they will sell their votes for cash up front, and then simply stay home on election day. This is such a great deal. They'll have the money in hand and be spared the bother of figuring out which candidate is offering them a bribe, and no more tiresome thinking about the issues, no standing in line at the polls, no anxious waiting for the vote count, and no reason to give a fuck. The biennial amount of 5,000 might have to increase gradually over the period to maintain continued support, lest the white right begin to think that 5,000 is not enough, and that a new entitlement is not keeping up with the cost of living, and leading them to the firm conviction that it's not fucking fair. But whatever the fucking cost, the return on investment for the rest of the American public will be quickly apparent. We can readily imagine the benefits of having this system in place for the next 10 biennial election cycles, beginning in November of this year. With the votes of the white right neutralized over a 20-year period, Americans may at last put an end to electoral college, the voter suppression, gerrymandering, the filibuster, and other forms of electoral chicanery that they have perpetuated minority rule since the founding of this country. And indeed, we might even decide to pay reparations due to other Americans who believe the debt to them is long overdue. Now, moreover, there will be the added benefit of a greater sense of security, and with the hope that the white right, having received reparations before demographics make them a minority, and not to mention long before they are before any hypothetical discrimination or oppression, will accept its new status with equanimity, and perhaps, and just perhaps, with this system in place, we may even hope that the white right will at last give up its vision of crushing the rest of America under their fucking boots. Now, if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, REW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out, and thanks for listening.